This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. New Society Publishers is your gateway to a regenerative future. They're not just about books, they're about transforming lives and communities through the power of knowledge and action. Their mission is simple: to inspire and empower individuals to create a more just, sustainable, and compassionate world. They envision a future where every person has the tools and resources they need to thrive in harmony with nature, where communities are resilient and interconnected, and where equity and justice are fundamental principles guiding our collective journey. If you subscribe right now to their newsletter at newsociety.com, you'll be the first to receive sneak peeks at new content and get discounts on upcoming title releases. You'll even get an exclusive discount code on your first purchase of books, ebooks, or audiobooks. So sign up today at newsociety.com. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. So, since I've been working in the regenerative agriculture and ecosystem restoration sector for about a decade now, there are a number of subjects and questions that just keep coming up again and again. Everything from how to finance a regenerative transition in farming, to what initial steps to take to accelerate ecosystem restoration, and of course the big one, how can I get access to the land? This is universal around all the places that I've traveled to. Anyone who has been in this space for any time knows that land access has become one of the biggest hurdles for people who are motivated to start farming, regardless of the enterprise or the practices that they want to start. Now, even people who come from landed families face difficulties in transferring land ownership in a way that doesn't saddle the recipient with debt. The fact that land has become a financial commodity and the demand from developers and speculators has all contributed to soaring prices and predatory loan conditions too. Now, yet there are alternatives, and that's exactly what we're going to explore here in this episode, where I'll be speaking with Kristina Villa. Kristina is a farmer communicator and community coordinator who believes that our connection to the soil is directly related to the health of our bodies, economy, and society. With over a decade of farming, communication, and fundraising experience, Kristina enjoys using her skill set to share photos, stories, and information in engaging ways which help to inspire change in human habits and mindset, causing the food system, climate, and overall well-being of the world to improve. Kristina has spent the last several years of her professional career saving farmland from development and securing it in nonprofit landholding structures that give farmers, stewards, and ranchers long-term and affordable access and tenure to it. Now, most of her work in the land access space is focused on equitable land security for BIPOC growers, addressing the inequalities and the disparities in how land is owned and accessed in the United States. Now, in this episode, we cover the vast topic of land access while touching on the history of land privatization and how so many groups of people have been systemically removed from land access. How land has become increasingly unobtainable, especially for farmers, traditional models of common land access, and how the Farmland Commons offers a modern legal template for equitable land access for farmers in the modern context. We really take the time to go into the specifics here as we explore case studies from nonprofits that have set up farmland commons in their communities, and how those legal entities are organized and maintained, and how the basic structure can be adapted to the unique needs and focus of the communities that they serve. Now, this is a very important topic for anyone interested in non-conventional paths to farmland access and tenureship, but also to those who might be considering retirement from their own farm and are motivated to enable a legacy of stewardship on their farm rather than selling the land base itself. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this discussion with Kristina Villa. Welcome, Kristina. I'm really excited to speak to you after having a previous episode with your colleague Ian. And before we get started, maybe you can tell our listeners a little about how you got started in farm work and the importance of land trusts in the United States.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm totally honored. So my name's Kristina Villa, and I live in Middle Tennessee. My husband and I have a farming business, and we grow vegetables using organic, biodynamic, regenerative practices. And we sell vegetables to restaurants, grocery stores, wholesale to other community supported agriculture programs. And we also have a small herd of dairy cows, about 20, that we milk. And then we have a herd share. So people sign up ahead of time and then they pick milk up from our farm each week. And I did not grow up farming at all. None of my family had a farm or a garden or a potted plant. I did not grow up in a landed family. I don't come from land. Like, this is all brand new to me. I'm what our USDA would call a first generation farmer, although I know in my blood, I can feel that I am not the first person to do this in my lineage. I just know that to be true. But yeah, I did not grow up farming. I grew up food insecure and spent a lot of time as a child going to food banks. And then as a young adult, I was just so interested and passionate about the food system and food security and food sovereignty and what that means and how to address it. So then I started spending time in food banks and soup kitchens and food pantries as a volunteer and working in those emergency food relief organizations. It was very clear to me that support in feeding people who are hungry is really crucial in that moment of hunger, but that it's not solving an issue and that the issue is deeper than that. And how I wondered, like, how can we address the fact that it's the same people coming each day who are hungry? And so although I had never grown anything in my life, I just had this moment of maybe if we could just grow our own food, we wouldn't be so reliant on this system that is perpetuating hunger. And so I started a garden, and then, I had no clue what I was doing. And I'm like totally embarrassed about all the things that I did wrong now knowing what I know. But I grew food, and it was crazy, and it was delicious, and it was shocking, and it was abundant. And I was like bringing it to the food banks and the food pantries. And making meals for hungry people with food that I grew myself felt like I had figured out the secret of how to print money legally. It was just like totally crazy. And I was just like, why is everyone not doing this? So, after a year or two of that, I was so obsessed with that feeling of abundance that it produced for myself, but also that I could share with others. And so I was like, you know what I need to do is I need to go live on a farm, because I want to grow a ton of food and I want to learn how to grow and eat from the ground all year round. I don't want this to be a spring, summer thing only. And I want to be able to teach other people how to do it. So I visited a bunch of different farms, and I found this farm not even in the state I lived in. I found this farm that was very far away, but they were the oldest and largest biodynamic farm in the state of Tennessee, which is where I live now. And they were not just farming and growing food. They were also living off the land in a reciprocal way. And they were canning all their own food and freezing all their own food and fermenting all their own food and eating seasonally and redundantly, really. And that's what I wanted to learn so badly. So I moved there thinking that, I'll live in this barn and I'll learn how to do this for 1 year and I'll then know how to go do it. And then it turns out that 1 year is not long enough to learn how to farm. So I ended up being there for 8 years, and that's where I met my husband. And then, so from that point, like, we learned how to farm. Like, we knew what we were doing. We were pumping so much food out of gardens while like building soil and also cultivating this beautiful community around workshops and events and CSAs and all of these things. And when it came time for us to branch out on our own, it was a moment of new realization, because what I was hit with was we are never going to be able to afford to buy a farm. Like, land costs are insanely high and they are completely out of touch with reality. And the people who are growing food are not the same people who can access land. And it was like, I'm getting chills just telling you about it, because it was such a whirlwind of a shock for me of spending my entire life thinking the issue is food. How do we solve food? How do we fix this thing around food? To, oh my God, it's actually land. Like, deeper than the issue around food is this issue around land. And if people don't have access to land, how can they grow food for themselves? And so that's when my focus really shifted. And all of a sudden I was consumed with the injustices around land and how can I be doing anything else with my time other than trying to get land for people who can grow food for people.
I
And so
would,
that is how now I am the co-executive director of the Farmers Land Trust. And so we work nationally to not just protect farmland, but also to transition it to next generation farmers at affordable, equitable rates and providing land for people to grow food using regenerative, organic, and biodynamic practices.
man, I love that story so much. It really brings me back to all the different steps and realizations that I went through myself, having also not come from a farming family and ending up in this situation. And there are many different places that you can stop and focus along this understanding of the inequities in the food system, the difficulties in access to land, the injustices in policy and historical precedents that have painted the landscape the way that we find it now, and the reason why it is so difficult for someone with a simple desire to be able to provide for their own sustenance to actually access the space and the resources needed to do so. I myself am focusing on some other areas, but I recognize the absolute necessity of addressing land access equity. So, in having built this understanding that this is where you wanted to dedicate your time and seeing this as a very acute acupressure point that could start to move or transform the difficulties that underlie access to food much more than just growing it. Tell me about the current situation that we find ourselves in and the historical precedents that brought us here.
Yeah, I mean, the historical precedents, like how far back are we going? We only have an hour.
Exactly. Yeah,
It's just,
fair
I mean,
enough.
it's great. Like our entire system is built upon stolen land and extracting people from land, removing people from land, and then also from their food. And like that is the very basis that our entire system is built upon. And then add in all of the policies that have been put into place that incentivize harmful growing practices and industrialized farming that deplete soil, that harm people, that harm ecosystems, that don't produce healthy, nutritious food, that then the stuff that is produced is like biofuels and animal feed and not anything that real people eat. I mean, there are so many points of crisis around this and like how we got here. I mean, at this very moment, the stats are incredibly alarming. Like the fact that land has appreciated by over 40% per decade, like that momentum, that growth in land price is completely unrealistic for anybody to be able to afford land. And it's that commoditization. Each time you sell land, it gets more expensive, but there's no more land being made, and we're losing it from farming. So that pressure point is so intense. And then the fact that 37 mid-sized farms are closing every single day is an incredible tension point around like where's our food going to come from in the future. We need to be concerned and thinking about this. And you know the something that you brought up is like that land access part being so important, and I kind of like cringe every time someone says that now, because obviously I totally agree with you. Like obviously land access is so important, obviously I think that, but I also have known and seen so many aging farmers who they're also in a really tough position. Like, I think that so much energy and attention is put toward these like younger farmers who need land and can't get on land. And like their economic system is in such a different place and like the economic realities are so different. And so, like, we all focus on that next generation that needs land, or like those cool, young, hip, cute farmers that need to grow food but don't have land access. And that is such an important part. But also, I have personally known and loved and looked up to and admired and felt deeply sad for so many aging farmers who own their land and don't have a way out. Like it's not just that our economic system is not set up to support next generation farmers. It's also not set up to support aging, retiring farmers. Like our system for farming has been that when they retire, they cash out on their land. But that is exactly how we've gotten into this system. That's exactly what has led us into this point of crisis that we're in right now, which I feel like is a very long-winded way to answer your question of like, how did we get here? But like that aging, retiring farmer population The only way for them to comfortably retire is to sell their land. But selling their land is how we lose farmland and how we're keeping it from next generation farmers. And so a lot of what we do at the Farmers Land Trust is not just addressing land access for next generation farmers, but also supporting and listening to and helping this aging population of landowning farmers who know that a conservation easement is not enough because that just limits what can happen on their land in the future. It just takes away certain rights from their land, but their land is still then going to go on the market and still only be available to the highest bidder. And also, that conservation easement is not going to ensure active agriculture. And these aging farmers want so badly for their legacy, for the life that they've built, for the business that they've built, for the community that they've cultivated around them, for the infrastructure that is invaluable that exists on their land already, to be passed on to that next generation that can then use it to continue to grow food for their communities. And like finding a way to solve that is how we will solve that land access problem.
Right.
It's like if we can just look at a bigger picture, then we'll see that the people who have the power to decide what happens to land in the future are the people who already own it. That's who we need to be talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you outlined the way that that these inequities are actually affecting the people that many perceive to be the ones benefiting from it, right? Even if you are in this industry, even if you are a legacy farmer and fully own your land, the way that it's set up still doesn't benefit you. And I think that is often ignored, much like you said, with this equally valid and important disparity for people who want to get in are not the only ones losing from the system. So with with this kind of meta crisis around access to land, farmland, successional models and such, who's actually benefiting from this? I mean, land has basically become a financial commodity now. So is it just people who use this to move financial instruments around?
I mean, it definitely has become a case where farmland is mostly an investment portfolio and like people are grabbing up farmland, like the corporate land grabs, the investment, all of these speculators and so forth everybody's after farmland for sure. And I think part of how we have lost so much land from agriculture is because of that short-sighted benefit because each generation sells off land to get that cash flow, but then they never see it again. And
Right.
that's, that short-sighted benefit or that need for money then, and then selling off the land. Or I think too that get big or get out policy, going back to your question of like, how did we get here? That's one of those ways is, that the policies that were put in place to incentivize commodity crop farming also pushed many people out of agriculture. And seeing so many of their older family members crumble and get crushed under farm debt and be so depressed that the suicide rate just skyrocketed in the profession of farming. A lot of people didn't want to be part of farming after that, and they wanted really badly to get away from farming. And so why would they not sell their land for money? It's like this horrible thing, but that need to address land access and that need to address land exit, like that transition out of farmland, that's really what we're doing at the Farmers Land Trust with the Farmland Commons model. Because with that Farmland Commons model, we're allowing land access through these 99-year long-term secure equitable leases, but we're also supporting aging retiring farmers in transitioning their farmland into these common structures. That way in the future, these new, these younger farmers who take over their land then are not going to be faced with this problem in the future. They're not going to have to sell their land, and they have an easy way out of this long-term lease. So every land that comes off of the commodity market and into a farmland commons through the Farmers Land Trust is part of that system being healed.
Let's go back to the origins of this concept because common land and farm commons is not a particularly new concept. It is perhaps in the United States, but this comes from somewhere. And so where have you drawn inspiration and precedent for how this could look in your context?
Yeah, thank you so much for acknowledging that too. It is so interesting because I live here in the United States and we as the Farmers Land Trust work here in the United States nationally, and like we are bound legally by, IRS regulation and all of these things, but and here to the public, like it is such a new concept. Like the term commons is such a different word that's not in the vernacular. And the idea of having a relationship with land that's anything other than ownership is such a foreign concept. But that is what it is. It is a foreign concept. I mean, genuinely. And like many of our case studies and organizations that are points of inspiration come from other countries where land has been held in common. And these organizations have had such great success in transitioning land from private ownership into communal ownership and then stewarding it for regenerative food production agriculture. On the Farmers Land Trust website, we have a blog post that we made that shares all sorts of organizations from across the world that we took inspiration from, studied, and then implemented the best practices, like interviews with those directors, interviews with people from those organizations. And if anyone is interested in that, I definitely suggest like Land Access Europe as a great place to start. If you want to Google that, they have many of the organizations around Europe focused on that one website. And yeah, I think that if the success hadn't been there first, I don't know if we would be as successful now implementing it into the United States, because that the pioneering thoughts and the cultural awareness that already existed there has been such an inspiration and also motivation to be able to say, hey, look, it worked there. Let's try it here. And of course, the legal contexts are different, but being able to implement a model within our system and society that works is so profound, And I think that the cultural mindset around ownership is really the biggest barrier. Like the legal structure exists, the model showing the proof of concept exists. It's really, how do we break out of this mold of thinking that ownership is a prerequisite for stewardship? That can't be true?
If anything, it can actually erode and undermine
Right.
the long-term stewardship. Let's talk about, I'm hesitant to go into the very long history of privatization of land. I can recommend some good books. One actually titled Land. I'm forgetting the subtitle right now. I'm finding it difficult to search. But it talks about how land has become commoditized and privatized over time. But obviously, this is not how it has been through most of the world, through most of time. And as it became something that it was in private ownership, which came with restrictions to access and use, this is really where we started to see exploitation of land-based resources and not the relationship-based stewardship form of taking sustenance, but also giving back and caring for the landscape in general, which was kind of the norm before then. We can pick this apart. We can look at the ways that cultures have done this differently over time. But in most circumstances, this wholesale extraction only came after privatization. And so not only what you're saying about how it's not a prerequisite to be able to do these things, it quite often is the only thing undermining what is our natural tendency to look after natural resources on a land base. And so, can you give me some examples about what can change or what is incentivized by bringing this back into a commons configuration?
Okay, absolutely. I'd love to answer that question, but I'm so excited about everything else you just said that I just have to share a couple of
Oh,
things.
let's go.
Okay, so yeah, definitely like land used to be held in common, of course. Like this privatization of land is totally a new concept. Like literally microscopes are older than the concept of private ownership of land. It's like we think about it being like, oh, this is how it's always been, but no, that's absolutely not the case. And of course, like indigenous people were holding land in common way before settlers ever got here. And then, but anyway, just you mentioned a book, so now I feel like I have permission to do that too,
Please
which
do, yeah.
there are two that I read them both over the winter. One of them was Buying Nature. And it was the drawbacks of land ownership
Nice.
as a conservation tool. And it really goes through the entire history of the United States and the different players that have been involved in protecting land, and then how it worked and how it didn't. And it is so fascinating because it brings into perspective the government, but also private groups of people and the public sector, and also nonprofits and like the largest, oldest land trusts and so forth. And it is so fascinating because, for instance, the national park system, like you think, oh, the government did a great job in protecting that. But every time it was the public, like every single time it was actually the public that was like, we need
Wow.
to save these. And I think there's a lot to be said there for community action, and how when people come together in a purpose, that so much can happen and change. And that is something that we've seen so often with the farmland commons, and how a community being catalyzed by vision and by inspiration and wanting to come together to support a piece of land and a farmer is so impactful and so beautiful to watch happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the other book that I'm like dying to tell you about is called Ramp Hollow. It's by Stephen Stoll, and it is all about the enclosure of land and how privatization of land and removing land from the commons is basically the root of everything that has gone wrong ever. And very often these books are based in Europe and like that, but this is the perspective from the United States. And so it's so fascinating because it does discuss the worldwide happenings and implications, but it is very much set on Appalachia, that this region in the United States that is more of a geographical region, not like a state by state thing. And it is so fascinating because he talks about how the enclosure of land here in Appalachia is what pushed people into poverty. And, the awareness and the understanding is that people of Appalachia are poor, but it's not because they just innately are away. It's because they used to live off the land, because their ancestors, because their whole culture was, I'm putting rambling in quotation marks because that term I don't think is very well known either, but being able to walk freely around land is that term, rambling. So they would ramble the hills and they would find and forage and they would move their cattle around and they would grow a garden for themselves. But once their land was taken from them, once they didn't have that land base to live off of anymore, they were pushed into wage earning. And I feel like this is such a great way to circle back to your question, because what does it mean to put land into the commons, and how does that incentivize better living, growing practices, livelihoods? Because when land goes back into the commons, when land is brought off of the market, out of private ownership, and put into a local farmland commons, those stewards of that land no longer have to be concerned with making that money to meet their market lease or high mortgage payment or high debt that they now have incurred, that most people are incurring if they purchase
Constantly
land
being
or they
pushed up
lease
through
land.
debt and inflation as well. So it's like a
Exactly.
treadmill that you can never get ahead of.
Exactly. And that freedom to not have to pay that, to not have to squeeze as many dollars out of everything you do on your farm, then gives you the freedom to build soil, to spend your time supporting and developing an ecosystem. And that is the sort of stewardship that is going to heal the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, and then so many things and other industries that could be extrapolated out of what could be if that financial model was turned around. But it's so transparent in terms of any type of land stewardship when you are not pushed to extract short-term profits to pay service to debt. The amount of options exponentially increase, and there's room for culture, there's room for relationship, there's room for diversity and things that are investments in other forms of wealth rather than just monetary returns. Yeah.
Fully, and create as a human being. Like there's more space for creativity, which then in
Yeah.
the long term ends up being, I think that longer term view too is if you're not focused on those short term revenue streams that can pay your mortgage this month, then you're able to put in place a longer term system or implement practices that take a longer time to see the benefits of. Like regenerative agriculture is not something that next month you start to see the benefits of. It takes time. And so those practices to heal land, to heal soil, to heal community relationships, like all of that takes time. And it's such a beautiful thing to be able to put land into a model like this that then allows people to be in a different relationship that is more connective.
100%. Now, you've been dropping all these little pearls along our line of questioning so far about how the common land model helps to address many of the inequities and the problems that we're talking about. And there's one more question I want to address before we really start to go into that and pick it apart, which is the incredible opportunity at this moment in time that we have with the enormous transfer of wealth and land resources that is taking place as we speak and will be over the next 2 decades, especially to set an entirely different trajectory of land management and stewardship that we really need to take advantage of. Can you outline that for me?
Yeah. I mean, I think so often when someone or an organization or people come together and they have this vision, they have to also manifest and cultivate the opportunity for it. And we are in a very fortunate position as the Farmers Land Trust to exist at a time when that change is already happening. So, yeah, as you said, I mean, in the next 10 years, over 400 million acres of land is going to change hands. And that is one of the largest wealth transfers that the entire world has ever seen. And it's happening right now. And it's going to continue happening over the next decade and a half. And if we were only able to address just a small fraction of the land that is changing hands, that could have enormous impact on our food system, on the health of people, on the economic viability of farms. I mean, what has to happen though, because of course we as a nonprofit are not going to be able to buy that land. What we need is landowners who are already in a position of making the power or having the choice of what happens to that land to choose a different path forward for the land that they have power over currently. Like instead of them saying, I want full market value from this, I want to extract every possible dollar that I can from this land by putting it on a real estate market that is exploitative. I'm going to choose something different. We need people to make different choices and to say, I'm not going to let this continue with me. I'm going to do something different. I am going to be the change. And those landowners who are already owning land that could be farmed or that is being farmed, for them to say, I am going to transition my land into a model that prioritizes food production, that prioritizes community, that prioritizes soil health and regenerative agriculture, that could be a game changer, not just for society now, but for the future of people, for the future of Earth. It is such a big deal, but people need to make that choice. And it is very difficult. I mean, most people do just want all the money that they can get from it. But we are very fortunate to be working with many landowners who are saying, I would rather protect this land into the future and give it to future farmers. And that is worth more to me than the dollars attached to it. So we work with landowners who can either donate their farm or who can work with us to provide a very significant discount on their land that makes it worth us as a nonprofit to be able to work with their community and to collaborate with them on a fundraiser to then give them the money that they need to exit and to retire comfortably with dignity. This is going back to when we were talking about those exiting farmers have no way out. Is part of it is that we do need to value what they've already invested their life into creating. And that's definitely not market value or very often above market value, but enough that they are able to be comfortable into old age. And so either working with landowners who can donate their farm or working with landowners who can provide a significant discount bargain sale into these farmland commons is how we work. But we need more people who are able to donate to then make that choice.
Yeah, that's I mean, look, it makes tons of sense, but I can also see how that could be a difficult sell to people who are maybe have seen in the past that my retirement and this land value come out to a certain price. And of course, there's value in seeing this protected in farmland into the future, and the value of seeing it managed regeneratively by the local community has incalculable value. But living costs are rising, healthcare costs are rising, there's all these things to weigh out in the middle. How do you make this pitch to farmers who are retiring or are considering this as a donation or a significant discount beyond just, or I guess, what does that conversation look like, making sure that their needs in retirement are taken care of and that they see some of the intangible or non-monetary benefits of making a transaction like this?
Yeah, it's such a funny thing. Like when I talk to people about what we do and who we are and the things that we're addressing, and everyone always asks that. Well, surely everybody wants as much money as they can get from land. Like, how do you convince people? Like, I don't have to convince people. I really don't. Like we have created an organization that stands very strongly for what we do and what we prioritize and what we support moving forward. And there are, luckily for us, luckily for the world, there are people out there who do care more about the future, about land, about community, about food than they do about dollars. And I'm so grateful for that. But putting that aside, just to answer your question.
No, and I don't doubt that.
People,
I have
yeah,
every bit of faith in that. I see it all the time over here in Europe as well. A big part of the climate farmers community has expressed these values as well. I guess the question is more about how does that conversation go in at least giving them the security that this form of transaction is also going to include them in these non-financial benefits and that they will be taken care of as far as their needs in the retirement years.
totally. I also just want to say that people donate land all the time.
Yeah.
Like to other organizations, like other
Mm.
conservation land trusts get land donated to them all the time, but that's mostly to keep people off of land, not to keep
Mm.
people on land.
Right.
Institutions, universities, like people are donating land all the time. I think the culture around donating land and land as legacy gifts already exists. It just does not exist for food production agriculture.
Yeah.
The culture of land donation is like how part of the challenge here is like how do we shift that culture of land gift, of land legacy, of land donation to be more geared toward these things that we all talk about and say we want about regenerative agriculture and about community food and local food, but merge those two. Like, how do we get people to see that they can also donate land for this important thing?
Right.
But yeah, so we definitely take every land project, every farm conversation, every landowner conversation as a unique project and consider what the goals are of that landowner, but also what their needs are.
Yeah.
And I feel very fortunate that we are a small land trust, and that gives us the ability to be more nimble and also to meet people where they are, and also to be more flexible in what we're able to offer and provide support in. So although there's not like a fixed dollar amount or percentage or something like that that we work off of, we meet people where they are and find out what their land is worth, what they need to retire, what their community ability is to help support a fundraiser, and then what are the benefits to land, ecosystem, species, community food, like how much value is there for our energy and effort to be put into that space. So there are a lot of factors that go into it. But also, I think that sometimes landowners are reaching out to many people and places and organizations to see what options there are for them. And many times they're faced with, sure, we'll take your land. Sure, we'll protect it for you, but you've got to leave and you've got to donate it fully. Like, and so one of
It's
the
all or
things that
nothing.
yeah. And one of the things that I love about what we do is that we are willing to do that flexible thing where we find out what their goals are and we meet them there. So like, for instance, we sometimes use a tool called a life estate, which allows the deed of land to be transitioned into the farmer's land trust and then into a farmland commons, while also allowing the exiting, retiring farmer to live on their land and in their house until they die. And that is something that I think is so beautiful, because that connection to land and their identity, it's like their entire life has been wrapped up in this farm, and to allow them to get to still be part of that land until they die is just such a beautiful thing. And that's something that they want and need very often, and that alone can bring down significantly the amount of money that they would need to relinquish the deed.
Sure.
Because allowing them to stay in their home, allowing them to not have to pay a mortgage or rent somewhere else, the ability to stay and be part of and connected to the land still is worth so much more to them than selling it on the open market and having to, move to Florida would be.
Right.
So that value there, I think, is so crucial. I mean, obviously there's also incredible tax benefits to donating land. The tax incentives alone are
Sure.
enough for some people. But there are other aspects, such as being buried on the farm once they die, or allowing heirs of their family lineage to have a first right of refusal to a lease for future farming. So, like, there are different ways that exiting landowners can still be part of and connected to the farm, and also allow their children or grandchildren to be connected to the farm. And those benefits are so different than that black and white all or nothing thing that you get when
Yeah.
you sell land on the open market. And so I think that adds to people's willingness and like almost like desire, really, to be part of this. Because, and also, like, we haven't touched much on the actual model, but through the farmland commons model, there are other opportunities and other ways for exiting farmer to still be connected to and part of the decision-making body that governs that land. So to let go is hard, but as long as you still get to hold on to parts of it, then it isn't as bad. And that's something that I feel like we're very fortunate to get to provide.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so let's break this down in a second, but I think just that flexibility and the ability to maintain a presence and some decision-making power really makes this much more of a transfer rather than a relinquishment. Maybe if that would be a good difference in wording, and speaks a lot to this generational transition that I think would really be missing out if it was a complete removal of the previous owners, because presumably, I would imagine in many cases, they have dedicated their whole life to caring for this piece of space. And just having access to those stories, that experience, and that memory of how things used to be, how they've changed, and how they would desire to see them is incalculably valuable, and would be such a shame to miss out as things move into different decision-making models and different stewardship.
Yeah, I mean, you're so hitting so many nails on the head right now. Like, that's another thing of that, like, westernized culture here in the United States, is that independence is like so important and autonomy is so important, and like we don't want people telling us what to do. But also, my gosh, it is so valuable to have that wisdom and knowledge of decades and decades at your fingertips. It's not even something you have to go after and ask for. It's like the older generation is always, they want so badly to tell you everything, to save you the time, to save you the trouble, to share what they've learned and pass that on to you. And it is so often a huge point of tension and clash, because, yeah, it's just that westernized culture thing. Like, we don't want that. And I'm saying we because I'm 34, so I feel young still. But I'm like, we don't want you telling us what to do. And the older generation is, listen to us. We know what we're doing. And it would be such a shame to not utilize and leverage that knowledge of, like, where the water flows, or just simple things that take a long time to observe and be part of before you really start to understand.
And are not necessarily apparent by observing it the way it is currently. I
So
know
true.
it was really important for my partner and I to maintain the relationship with the previous owners of this place that we bought for that history, for that knowledge, for the relationship that they cultivated that have given me insights into management here that even though I am doing it differently than they did, I don't know how I might have ever gotten that information if we did not maintain communication and a relationship with them.
Yeah, fully.
So let's dig in now to the fact that a farmland commons is not one thing, that this configuration can be tailored to the needs of not only the people who are transitioning the land into different management, but also the local communities who have a vision for where it could go.
Yeah, totally. I just it's so fun talking to you. Okay, because I feel like you totally get all the things. It is such a cool thing because although it is the farmland commons model, it is so adaptable and can be changed and modified and adapted to place to fit the needs of a particular piece of land or a particular farm or a particular community. And that's such an important part of what we're doing, is that it's not something that is a template just for one sort of parcel or one sort of region or one sort of farmer, but really it's a model that can be and is being implemented and adapted all throughout the United States. And so, yeah, so the farmland commons model can be either two different ways structured. So, what we're doing with the farmland commons model is using existing IRS legal structures that have been around for decades, but they've been being used in different ways. And what we're doing and what we have done is change them, or I'm sorry, not change them. We are using them in a way that is focusing on and prioritizing regenerative agriculture, food production, community ownership of land. And so what these are 501c2 or 501c25 landholding entities. So farmland commons can be either one of those. In the case of a 501c2, it is an affiliate entity of a single 501c3 nonprofit. And there are times and benefits to that. But what we are really leaning into and what all of our farmland commons are those 501c25 structures, which are created when 3 or more, up to 35, according to the IRS, 3 or more 501c3 nonprofits come together to create this affiliate landholding entity, this 501c25, which then is the farmland commons where the deed to the land is held. So land has to come in through one of the parent 501c3s, but then it goes down and is held in that local 501c25 farmland commons, which then has its own board of people who are all local to place. And that is a really important aspect of this, because holding land in common and also holding land locally is such a crucial part of what we're doing. So much land around the country is owned by absentee landowners who are so disconnected from the land, who are not living with or a part of that land, and they being the decision makers of land that they know nothing about or not connected to is something we're trying to address. So that is an important part of this model, is that local commons has its own board of people, and they're all local to place and they're all connected to that farm in some way. So the deed is held there, and then a 99-year lease if it is allowed by state law. So state law is what governs how long a lease term limit can be. And in some states, it is not 99 years, but we advocate for a 99-year or as long as possible. So steward, rancher, farmer gets 99-year lease that is secure, affordable, equitable. And that leaseholder can be either an individual person, or it can be an LLC, or it can be a nonprofit. And that is an important part of what you just brought up too, of how it can be different in many places. And allowing that leaseholder to be any sort of legal entity is a really crucial part, because there are incubator farms that could be the leaseholder that then sublease to multiple, other farmers, or it could just be a family farm stewarding land, or it could be a big business that's, so being able to adapt it in that way is really important, to be able to support many different types of farming practices and organizations and businesses. And then whoever that 99-year leaseholder is also mandatorily has a seat on the Farmland Commons Board. And so they are then not just a leaseholder, they're also part of the ownership. And that's really important too, because so often the power dynamics that are at play where a farmer is operating on leased land, they're just receiving a lease. They're not part of that ownership decision making. And so having them be a seat on the board ensures that they are part of creating the lease terms that they are then adhering to. And that gives them more of obviously a say in what they're doing, but it builds them into the structure deeper and gives them a deeper connection to the organization, to the structure, to the land itself. And then the lease is really where it spells out the conservation stewardship practices that are mandated. And that really is it as far as what is mandated in the lease. So as long as the farmer is going to provide stewardship to that land, is going to produce, food, flowers, fiber, medicine, creating sort of agriculture products for their community, that is all that they have to do to get this long-term lease. And the cost of the lease is something that they're part of creating also in those lease terms. And so, typically those are the cost of taxes and insurance, the carrying costs of the land. And then the lease itself, being that longer term lease, is something that can be passed on to next generation farmers. So the ability to build equity shows up in many different places in this model. And this would be one of them, that if the farmer who has a 99-year lease has a child that also wants to farm, that this lease can be passed on to them. Or if it's a nonprofit, that's secure for a very long term of their life. And other ways that that equity shows up is obviously in the decision-making power of having the leaseholder be on the board, but also the way that the farmland commons is structured. Of course, we are very inspired by global movements of land access and commons, but also the community land trust movement here in the United States informs our work very deeply. And so one of the ways that that inspiration shows up is in the farmland commons model, that a ground lease is an option, so that while the land is held in the farmland commons, the leaseholder could lease the land but own a house or other buildings or infrastructure, say a barn or something, that then is their personal asset to be able to sell into the future when they want to exit the lease. And so that's another way that equity can play out and show up. And I guess I'm going to stop there because I've just been talking for a long time.
No,
Do you
this
have
is
particular
brilliant.
questions or?
Yeah, no, so that gives an option for building equity on the land that doesn't require personal ownership of the land itself, and at the same time incentivizes, improvements of infrastructure and other investments that would otherwise perhaps be disincentivized in so many other lease structures.
Totally,
Yeah.
fully. And so in some cases, we have seen that the leaseholder ends up paying a little bit more in their rent each month because they want, so any lease revenue generated is then invested back into that land, back
Gotcha.
into that
Yeah.
farm. And so maybe they want to pay more of a lease rate to invest into their soil or pollinator habitats or roof on a barn or something like
Sure.
that. So
With the confidence that they're helping to make the decisions in the ways that that is being reinvested.
fully,
This
yeah.
is really cool. So I can tell you from experience that two core things right there are already absolutely transformative for farmers. One is the affordability of a lease, that already, and the second one being this long-term continuity. And this is something that we're seeing time and time again here in the climate farmers community in Europe, that when you can only find a short-term lease, even people who are genuinely motivated to invest in and regenerate land feel that they can't do it. You can't plant trees on a short-term lease of
Berries even. Yeah,
nothing that
totally.
takes more than a year to harvest. And between short-term leases and high lease costs, even the most regenerative minded farmer is forced in their hand in their options of how they can steward or cultivate, or in this case, probably extract value from that, just in order to keep their head above water and stay in the game at all. And just by changing those two things, I know so many people who would make very different decisions on how they farm when those options are opened up.
Yeah, I mean the infrastructure too. I mean, definitely like planting trees or perennials of any kind. Like how can you fathom doing that if you don't even know if you'll be there 5 years from now? That's such a hard thing to invest in. But the infrastructure needed, I mean, you need a well or you need a shed. Like how could you possibly, and so what we end up seeing, like you are describing, is like short farmers on short-term leases are just struggling or getting by without the infrastructure that they need to make a more efficient, effective business because they don't have long-term security. It's this vicious cycle that doesn't help anybody.
No, absolutely not. So I'm curious too, we've kind of gone over the different configurations and many of the potential benefits. Can you give me some stories about how this looks like in practice? Because one thing is the concept of all the different configurations that could be implemented, and another is the ones that you are helping to form or are well established that give a model of what this could look like and address the specific needs of the community where they're located.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we are starting with a landowner who has been farming their whole life, who want to see their farm passed on to the next generation and actually stewarded as a farm that produces food for their community. So that's sometimes the starting point catalyst. And we have examples of those happening all over the country of and in various ways too. Like some of them are full land donations, some of them are those discount bargain sale where we're collaborating with community to do a fundraiser to acquire the land so that there's an equitable transition out by that landowner. And in all of those cases, we're talking about farms that have been legacy farms that, these people have spent decades and decades building and honing in systems. And it's just so beautiful what they've created. And, some of them are choosing that option of that life estate where they get to stay on their land and live their life there. And some are understanding that the only way for it to thrive is if they leave. And both of those cases are just so beautiful and humbling to get to be a part of. It's really transformative. But anyway, in some cases, we're starting with a farmer who has been growing food for their community already, and they just have been operating without land security, without tenure to land. And I think seeing people like that is very much of seeing myself in those people, but also like feeling for them and understanding the context that we all live in and knowing that we can do something about it. And so in those cases where we're starting with a farmer who's already growing food, who just needs land security, we're doing land searches, we're doing outreach to landowners, we're doing different activities to raise awareness and engagement to find a parcel of land that still fits into that need of either a donation or a discount bargain sale. So in all of these cases, that is the framework that we're working within. And then in some places, we're working with nonprofits who, this land access thing has been a topic of a like buzzword topic for a long time. And I think that some nonprofits are starting to realize that they're tired of just talking about it and that they are ready to do something about it. And so that's pretty cool to get to work with nonprofits who are like, we are ready to put our resources and our time into supporting something that is tangibly going to make a difference. And that's really cool. But yeah, I mean, I think I should, if it would, maybe you'd want to talk to some of the farmers or the commons in the future and do like whole episodes with them.
Yeah, absolutely, I would. In fact, I'm kind of eyeing a small series on this by starting to reach out to the other land access and farmland commons organizations from your list, and especially those here in Europe, because this is extremely relevant to the community that I help to manage and that I'm a part of, but also the farmers who are working within these configurations and who can give examples from the field of what it used to be like and how this is different and what it enables them to do. I think these stories are fundamental to charting a different path forward and giving us the inspiration that is needed in this crucial moment of transition of land, because I don't have the exact stats the way you put them out about the amount of land that is being transferred into new hands over the next decade and a half in the States, but I know it's comparable here in Europe. It's something that we talk about regularly. And so, yeah, this is definitely something that warrants being, really extracted and explained from all the different perspectives. And I think the options of the different configurations, like you outlined, but in story form and from experience are just as valuable, because one thing is to kind of theoretically extrapolate what could be done, and another is to hear what has been done and what you might like to emulate from those models.
Yeah, fully. And just, from my perspective, like getting to witness the transformation that
Mhm.
happens in communities and in people's livelihoods, it brings me to tears. It's the most humbling, beautiful. I can't even explain it.
Well, I think what's so powerful about what you are doing with this work here is giving a different option within the current legal system that many people don't even know is available,
I
right?
mean, that's one of the largest challenges too, is that people don't know this is an option. Here
Right.
we have this new, radical, unique, creative way to do things, but like, how do we tell people about it? Like, how do we get the word out there? Because
Yeah.
they don't even know this option exists currently.
Yeah, it's true. And I hear from so many different parts of the world through this podcast over what's almost 9 years of putting this show out, that many people are trying to tackle this issue and are facing barriers from different parts of the unique context that they're operating within, many of whom I don't think are fully aware of the structures that do exist and have successful track records to set this kind of farmland common configuration or legal entity that can accomplish many of their goals. So I guess the other thing that I would like to understand from this is, where are the barriers beyond these big structural topics that we started this conversation with to getting something like this established and implemented? I know from my own experience, some, including myself, naive people who are starting out, don't understand the amount of communication and perhaps conflict resolution or structural establishment that is required to bring multiple parties and stakeholders into an agreement about how land should be managed. Is that one of the challenges that you find when getting these things started, or are there totally different hurdles to get through?
Well, definitely. I mean, one of the challenges, it's also getting to your question around the community aspect, is just that this model is a community based, community centered model that brings together multiple people, multiple organizations, and working with other people is challenging. Working with people is hard. There's this saying that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And that's something I really hold very closely and really live by, because being a community member itself is challenging and difficult, because being a community member means that you are putting yourself in a position of irritability and annoyance, really. Like, you're giving up time, personal space. You're like agreeing to be inconvenienced, basically. But that is how you build relationship and community, is by being available for people when they need you, and by being able to show up for people in ways that other people aren't or can't. And that is building community and being a community member. And you know I think very often community leaders are kind of local rock stars or local celebrities, and that is because they are showing up for people and like doing that hard work, and it's not fun and glamorous. It's like hard to show up for people, and then layer that into this farmland commons community centered model. It's like, now you are showing up for people and having hard conversations and working through things with not just your own community of nonprofit people or local food system people, but this is bringing together multiple layers. So we're talking about landowners, farmers, next generation stewards. We're talking about the nonprofit stakeholders who are going to be part of this, and everybody has a different perspective. And it is very challenging working with people. And, you know, although we have these legal templates that are a great starting point and they are super accessible in the way that they're not just legalese, it's not just you pull a template and it's just legal jargon. They have been made to be accessible in the way that they have plain language right next to the legal language, so that anybody can pick them up and read them. And when we first did this, we really thought we were addressing it for people with a language barrier who English was not their first language. But very quickly, we realized that very smart people even do not just read legal language every day, and that it's very difficult to decipher and fully understand and feel comfortable with. So that was an aspect of making all these legal templates have plain language too. But beyond that, it's difficult beyond just the accessibility part because every person has an opinion and every person has a different perspective on what it means to steward land in community using regenerative practices. I mean, regenerative itself is not there's no definition that everyone can agree on. So yes, the biggest challenge is this. And even though we bring these legal templates that are starting point, you can layer on as many legal templates, any legal documents, agreements that you want, but none of it matters at the end of the day if there's not good, solid relationship first. And so that is the challenge. And we have this great illustration on our website that's the process of creating a farmland commons. And it starts out with that relational aspect because without good relationship, without having spent time together and built trust in other ways and gotten to know each other, to throw people into a room or, this virtual meet space even, and then expect them to just like work out every word about how things are going to be handled from here into the future, that's completely unrealistic. So the time it takes is a challenge. The interpersonal relationships, even when you like each other, even when you do trust each other, even when you do know each other, is still difficult. It is hard to work with a lot of other people. And then, this is going to be true for any nonprofit in any direction or any person, but like the time and money it takes is a challenge. Like money to acquire land is a challenge. And then, of course, where everyone thinks the money should go and how it should be used and blah, blah, blah is a challenge. So yeah, it is full of challenge, but also back to that saying, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, go together. Like it is so worth it.
Yeah.
Like what we can do together is so empowering and beautiful and sustainable and better for the long term than how we are holding private property in individual choices right now.
Yeah, and with all of those compromises that must be made to collaborate effectively with other people, you gain so many other benefits that I think at least the society and the culture that I grew up in, mostly in the suburbs of the Midwest, didn't really prepare me for doing that effectively or communicating the benefits that I was missing out by following the common narrative, at least in American culture, of do everything by yourself, be super independent, and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Nobody helps everybody. There are huge disadvantages to that are not communicated in our culture.
I think it's this lie that we're told, really, like that ideal that you're explaining right now of like the American farmer who does everything themselves and pulls themselves up from their. This is so lonely and it becomes too hard and too much. And then people feel like they're failing when really no one actually does that, And that's not how we were meant to live. Like we were meant to live in community. We were meant to support each other. The idea that you have to be completely self-sufficient and grow all the stuff on your own, like that's kind of insanity. And probably part of the reason that farming has one of the highest suicide rates.
Sure.
That's just not how it's supposed to be, especially with the economic situation that's layered on top of it. There's just no way.
No, and it's quite likely that you're not failing, that you just need to ask for help and be open to receive it or, lend a hand to somebody else and reestablish those bonds that all rural communities around the world either were or are currently based on. And oftentimes, at least in my travels, what I've observed is the less monetary resources that a community has, the more they rely on each other to pick up that slack. And it creates so much more resilience when that there's a group of people, usually at least with immediate or extended family, if not entire villages or counties or further than that. Yeah.
Yeah, fully. And really, I live in the South. I live in Tennessee. And around here, like we do that just like innately. Like we show up to help each other bale our hay or when a cow is out or, just we trade vegetables and have potlucks every Sunday. It's just like something that we do. But I I wish for more of that, more vastly. And the farmland commons model itself is set up to hold not just one parcel of farmland, but between 4 and 12, so that those parcels of farmland, so that those farmers on the land can share resources between themselves. Like, for instance, not every farm can afford to have a refrigerated truck or an accountant or, but like together they could.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I know that a lot of these structures are specifically intended to make it more accessible to otherwise marginalized or disenfranchised communities to participate in farming that have been kept from land ownership through structural means. And that's a whole nother subject that we can go into. But tell me about how this model can be specifically attractive to immigrant communities or otherwise disenfranchised folks from the farming space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this model is attractive to many different people. I mean, landowners who want more for their land in the future, farmers who cannot afford land. I'll just say that we, as the Farmers Land Trust, definitely prioritize land access for people who have been historically, but who also continue to be. I think we fall into that trap of being like, oh, historically speaking, but yeah, that's true. But also today, like right now,
Yeah, it's very
people
much still
are,
present. Yes.
yeah, like right now, people are having land stolen from them, are being kept out of bureaucratic systems that are made to look like this is nobody's fault, but are very purposefully keeping specific groups of people away from land.
Yeah.
So while this model is beneficial and helpful to, anyone anywhere who wants to protect land, but also steward it and make sure that people are connected to land and make sure they have secure land access to do regenerative agriculture, like we as the Farmers Land Trust know that right now 98% of land is owned by white people, and we are prioritizing land access for people who have been and who continue to be systematically displaced from land.
Yeah. Yeah. So, man, there's still so many little details that we could go into here. This is such a broad topic. And as we already talked about in this discussion, there are kind of an infinite configuration of manifestations as this is adapted to context, place, groups, communities, and so on. But I would love to get advice, going back a little bit to what we talked about a second ago, of these hurdles that you're inevitably going to face beyond just signing legal documents, and how to set expectations and get a realistic idea of what you're getting yourself into in order to perhaps increase the chances of success when looking at all of the communications that need to happen, the time frame that this is likely to take when going into it.
Yeah, that is I mean, definitely building relationships now is the best way to start. So, for instance, if you are a young farmer, or if you are a farmer in need of land access, connecting with landowners who already have working farms or farmland to start talking about the potentials and what the future could look like,
Hmm.
what your vision and dreams could be for that farmland and how they could be included in that, sharing about the model or, whatever model you're interested in. Of course, my perspective is of the farmland commons model, but sharing with them about that and getting them on board with this different path forward for their land before it's too late, before they hit that wall of, I need X amount of dollars right now, I'm sending it to auction tomorrow. Like, the path toward this takes a long time, and to get everyone on the same page takes a long time. And it is so much better when there's not that urgency need and people have time to prepare for this. Also, building out the relationships with community partners who can support the markets that'll be needed, but also the nonprofit partnerships that'll be needed to create the actual entity. And so that trust thing, like I shared before, like it's really all based on relationship. Like, establishing that first allows us as the Farmers Land Trust to be more helpful in implementing the structure and transitioning that land when the group of people have already been doing their community-based work and community-based organizing for, X amount of years. And really that is the thing, is like the fastest that we could ever do this would be 2 years from start to finish. Like, these things take so much time. And so to your point about what are clear expectations is like, we cannot enter when it is a situation of land that's on the market and you want to save it today. That's not, we can't plug in there. And that clarity on expectation is, if we bring all of the people together and you already have identified land and you already are a farmer, like start to finish, it's going to take a year plus to get all of this in place. And I think, people want things to happen right now, and it just doesn't happen like that. Like land transition, the capital needed, like all of it, the putting people in place, the legal structure, it takes time.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to know going into it. And it's great general advice beyond whether or not you're pursuing one of these configurations to invest now in relationships with the people who produce your food, whether you're actively trying to move into that space or you're just trying to, I don't know, build a relationship with those people, get a better sense of the quality of the food that's available in your community. There's so many good reasons to start building those relationships, even aside from what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I mean, and people are always asking, like, I'm a farmer, I need land, like I'm growing food on insecure land right now. Like, how do I find a landowner who's willing to work with me? Or like, how do I find land to farm on? And what we always tell people is, don't look on the market. Like, the cards are stacked against you already. Put that out of your mind. Instead, think about a geographic focal point of an area that you want to be in. What's the radius as far as like miles or drive time that is suitable for you, like where you already live, where you're already comfortable with, maybe where you already have established markets or something, that ties you to place. And then start driving around or looking at tax parcel maps and identifying the plots of land that would be suitable to you. And then send those landowners a letter. Like, the right to know laws make so much information about land and the ownership of that land available to the public that we can look it up online, or you can physically go to your courthouse and pull those files and data up so that you can access who owns that land, what their address is, send them a letter, tell them what you're thinking about. And it is so surprising to people all the time that there are so many landowners out there who have not put their land on the market because they don't want it to be sold for development. And really introducing yourself and giving them a new opportunity would be maybe what they're waiting for. Like they want this to happen. They just don't know where to find you.
Yeah, that's true. Because while it may be easy to go and find out who owns land within the radius and the search criteria, like you just mentioned, the opposite is not necessarily true. For those people to figure out
Yeah.
who will be interested in taking
Yeah.
over and preserving what they've built throughout their career and their probably multiple generations. So it is somewhat on you to make yourself visible and start those conversations.
And really, it's like a numbers game too.
Hmm.
Like, definitely you're going to send, 50 letters and maybe only hear back from one or two people, but then it's worth it. Like a conversation with two landowners who are interested in transitioning their land to you at, maybe no cost, maybe a little cost, like you didn't ever
Sure.
know. And really, I'll just say steps, like baby steps, lead you toward a more long-term secure sort of situations. Like maybe this year you're just going to lease some land from them, and then that landowner see how it goes and they're so happy with what you're doing that they
Sure.
then want to do more with you. And so really it's that relationship building again. It's so crucial, and that's what changes people's minds. That's what builds a better path for the future. Like, it's all built on the time that you invest in building trust, building relationship with people.
Yeah, and what's occurring to me when you say this is, if for some reason you end up without land, you're probably going to have to go around and put out a lot of job applications anyway. Just get ahead of that and do that directly with the people that you would want to collaborate in some sort of land management with, and see if you can't avoid having to go into a different sector.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point.
Nice. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for now. We've got really useful advice to pass over to the listeners to actually get active in this process. So the last bit is, how can they get in touch with you and get some support, let's say, to start this process?
Yeah, thank you. We would love that. So please go to our website, thefarmerslandtrust.org, and also sign up for our newsletter while you're there. And we also have social media accounts on all of your favorite social media. So please go connect with us there. As far as like getting our support, Our model, structure, process, and templates are all available as open resource, free to anyone to use. And so you could just go to our website, get everything you need, create a farmland commons on your own and never talk to us. And that's totally fine. And we're happy to be that. We're also happy to connect for conversation and share more, give any sort of guidance, input, thoughts that we have to just help you on your way. And then, we're also happy to collaborate and form a farmland commons with you or just help you and your community do that. And so really the levels of support we offer are very vast and they can be deeply intertwined and we can form legal relationships, or it can also just be that we're offering reflections and thoughts on what you share, more information. And really we're happy to provide any level of that that's helpful or needed for people in their community. So, we have a contact page. If you want to send us a direct message through our website, then we'll get that and reach back out and set up a meeting. So really any of those ways, but please go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, connect with us on social media, and would love to stay in touch and support in any way we can.
That is fantastic. I'm really glad organizations like you guys are out there. And I really appreciate you taking time and really spelling out the details of this. This is really exciting stuff and I think offers many new options for people who are struggling with what the common problem is access to land for so many people.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored. Thank you.
Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account @regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.